are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies. Discussion is all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?
Good afternoon. I'm Jakob Weitzman, political sustainability reporter. I cover chemicals, pollution, and plastics. And we're going to speak on a topic today where pollution and chemicals converge. At the moment, Europe is currently debating one of its most ambitious chemicals restrictions in its history, a potential EU-wide restriction on PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals. There's more than 10,000 of these substances. They're toxic and they're everywhere. They're in our blood, our water, in our kitchen, in our non-stick frying pans and baking sheets, but they're also in countless industrial processes that are crucial for the competitiveness and the clean transition. However, the scientific evidence around PFAS and health risks is impossible to ignore. These substances persist for decades in water, soil, and the human body, and contamination cases are becoming impossible to overlook. At the same time, industries across Europe warn that some PFAS applications should remain in use where alternatives are limited or non-existent. So today we'll discuss how Europe can tackle the sensitive issues around PFAS and whether an EU-wide ban will see the light of day and how that will manifest itself. Let me introduce our speakers. Here I have with me Elisa Consoli, the REACH manager at the Aerospace and Defense Industry Association Europe, who will tell us how strategic industry depend on certain chemicals and that the picture is more complex than it seems. And I'm also joined by Judah Paulus, the member of the European Parliament for the Greens EFA party and the member of the Environment Committee, who is one of the Parliament's most outspoken advocates for stricter PFAS regulation. And then also, last but not least, is Charles Wenke, the Director of the Environment and Safety at the Dutch National Institute for Public Health and the Environment. You represented one of the 5 countries pushing the EU to act on a continent-wide PFAS ban. So we have half an hour ahead of us, which of course is never enough for such an instrumental and crucial topic, but let's try to dive right in. Charles, I'd like to start with you. You and the Netherlands were part of the PFAS restriction proposal that was submitted in 2023, alongside with Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Germany. I want to ask what has changed since then, since you worked on this proposal, and what do we know now that we didn't know then? And does it strengthen the case for a broader restriction than the one that you initially proposed back then?
Well, thank you, Jacob, for that question. I would say that, well, the basis of the proposal, of the restriction, hasn't changed, but we learned a lot since then. I think, well, you have to imagine when we published it, afterwards you have a consultation period of half a year. We received more than 5,000 responses to the consultation, containing more than 100,000 pages. So it contained really a lot of information about the impact that the restriction would have. And that also helped us shape the restriction in the next phase, the restriction proposal. So it helped at the same time targeting how the derogations could take place, so the time you have to find alternatives, because sometimes alternatives are already at hand. We know that, and we knew that in abstraction, but now we know much more specifically in which cases you can have alternatives, but also where there aren't yet. So that's one of the things we learned. The second thing we learned, that wasn't part of the consultation, but we learned a lot more about the impact about PFAS, and I think it's even more widespread than we knew 5-6 years ago. So the reason to act is even more pronounced, I would say. And the third thing we learned is that we also see pushes for innovation coming up, because once the business case is there for seeking for alternatives, you also see companies trying to find for it. And I also think industry worked a lot on trying to get a grip about the supply chain, because that's also very important if you want to do something about PFAS.
Do you think that one of the benefits, aside from proposing the restriction, was to raise the awareness of PFAS? Do you think that you achieved that in your proposal?
Well, I would say, yeah, I think awareness increased a lot, really a lot. At the same time, it's difficult to talk about achieving awareness. I mean, you have to measure awareness at a certain level, and it's a lot higher, but still there are places where there are issues that we don't know about and that industry doesn't know about. So awareness can even be higher, but it's gone up really a lot, I think so, yeah.
I want to take stock on where we are right now. It's a very timely event to have this panel a week after the Socio-Economic Committee of ECHA closed its consultations, where it received thousands of input from stakeholders such as industry, NGOs, scientists, and researchers on the possible alternatives for PFAS. And now we're at a point where ECHA, the chemicals agency based in Helsinki, will have to go through these consultations and then hand over their two opinions, one from the Socio-Economic Committee, which looks at the impact on the industry mainly, and also from the Risk Assessment Committee that looks at the scientific impact on human health and the environment of PFAS. And they will hand that over to the Commission to decide on how to restrict PFAS, whether it will be from consumer use or will be more expanded, and which sectors will be provided exemptions in five-year derogations, 12-year exemptions, and so forth. So it's really a monumental year for PFAS and how the EU will decide on how to go forth. But I wanted to ask, for Jutta, we have known about PFAS for far too long. I mean, the Stockholm Convention was maybe two decades ago almost, and that was when, even longer back then, I mean, even in the US, we knew about the PFAS cases with Mr. Lawyer Robert Billett's case against DuPont, which you can see as Mark Ruffalo portrayed in the film Dark Waters, but we don't need to touch on that today. You've been the strongest advocate, I must say, against PFAS pollution in the European Parliament, and you've worked in the chemicals industry before that. Why do you think that Europe has been so slow to act? And do you think that the industry was honest about what it knew in Europe and when?
Well, I believe that industry does talk to each other, so they probably have known at least as long as the US industry has known. And there it was, I read a very interesting book, which I've nearly finished by now, by Mariah Blake. They Poisoned the World, Life and Death in the Age of PFAS. And there she collected the stories of people who were exposed to PFAS. A lot of them workers at the respective factories, so not farmers like the guy who was portrayed in Dark Waters, but workers at the respective factories, women giving birth to children with birth defects, people acquiring cancer at the age of 25. So there was a lot of evidence actually which could have led to stronger restrictions much earlier. And I'm not sure whether this was all unknown in Europe or whether it was just like, okay, let's wait until we are forced to. Because what we have seen in the case of the substances which are restricted already, like PFOA, PFOS, and so forth, we have restricted a very limited number of PFAS substances, but what we have seen is the industry switching to a different PFAS, where the research just hasn't gotten as far yet. So I'm not sure whether they have been all honest with us on what they knew or what they didn't know. And so I believe it was high time to take this group approach, because if you keep in mind that we have several thousand PFAS, if we manage to restrict one a year, we would be still restricting in several millennia, which clearly can't be the way forward.
When it comes to waiting too long to act, I do know that a few, or if not more, many EU member states wanted to wait until the EU universal restriction process was done. I mean, I spoke recently last year with the caretaker Dutch Environment Minister Thierry Aatsen, who said that, made a point that we need more clarity and to wait for what the EU decides, rather than take action like France and Denmark have done to ban PFAS in consumer products. Do you think this was the right approach?
Well, of course, things should have happened much faster and much earlier. So generally, I'm always a fan of faster solutions, especially when it comes to the protection of human health and the environment. But we have a common market. So I think the approach to say, we have one single market where goods and people and data and money can flow across the borders, is not the right place to go to national restrictions. But what I do think is that the countries which have gone forward with those restrictions have also sort of changed the mood a bit, and so in that way have found a way to speed things up with a small detour, because waiting until each and every national member state is on the same page would have been impossible.
Elisa, I'll bring this over to you, keeping Juta's answer in mind. Of course, the aerospace and defense sectors argue that PFAS is still critical in many applications. And what we really want to understand is where the alternatives exist and how the Commission can support substitution and more research and development into finding these alternatives. And the industry wants more time. Because PFAS is so critical in these applications because of its durability, its heat resistance, and its performance under extreme conditions. I mean, you think of like military equipment, you think of semiconductors, for example, where it's hard to find alternatives, as companies argue in the consultations from ECHA. But given how long we've known about PFAS pollution, is it fair to say the industry should have moved faster to find alternatives? And where alternatives don't exist, what makes PFAS so difficult to remove from your products and manufacturing processes?
Well, thank you for the very easy questions, first of all. But yes, unfortunately, it is not easy to find alternatives. As Charles has mentioned, we do know that some alternatives already exist, but having an alternative to one specific PFAS substance that works in some products doesn't mean it works everywhere. So it's not necessarily a universal alternative to that substance in whatever use. To be honest, within the same product, within the same plane, there could be an alternative to PTFE that works in one system but not in the other system. And this is because the thing that makes PFAS so bad also makes it so good. So the fact that it's so difficult to get rid of it once it's in the environment, once it's in the human body, it's also what makes it very durable, what makes it, gives it the property of thermal resistance, corrosion resistance, which is what we do need in order to have a safe product. So this is something that I've also discussed before. Several sectors have also a different concept of safety. We do everything that is done in aviation and in the defense is to guarantee the safety. We have the safety of the passengers and we have the safety of the military personnel that handles our products. So that is what we work towards. And as Jutta also mentioned before, indeed, once some PFAS were banned, then the alternative was another PFAS. We don't develop chemistry. So we, as aerospace and defense, we do not look in the scientific development towards new chemistry. We can only test for our uses the chemistry that is created. So of course, if you look from just a performance point of view, if one PFAS is banned and there is another substance that gives you the same properties, that is kind of like, let's call it the trap that you will fall into, because you need something that gives you the performance. We do not have the acceptable loss of performance concept, so if something lasts, okay, it lasts 5 years instead of 7, fine. No, we have, every time we substitute something, by law, it needs to be either performing equally or better of what we are substituting. So we do not have the luxury of picking and choosing. And we don't use PFAS because it's cheap, that I can tell you. It's, those are like some of the most expensive substances, but those are the ones that do guarantee performance that then, for us, builds into safety.
Could you like explain or list some examples where PFAS application could be a matter of life or death?
There are so many.
Maybe a bit too dramatic, but...
And it is also, let's say that, for example, in hydraulic fluids, they are used to avoid that the fluid will corrode the little tubes that the fluid is in. And of course, as you know, hydraulic fluids connect different systems in the plane, and it's all about pressure. If there is a leak, there is no pressure, there is no control of the plane. So that is one example. Some PFAS are also have been found to be replacement for halons, which are ozone-depleting substances that are banned worldwide. and they are used for fire suppression, because in an airplane, when there is a fire, you need to suppress the fire. You cannot just put any gas into the cabin. So this is a little bit where we have the challenge of this is also safety for us.
One thing I also, because I know that there were some military applications that were excluded from the proposal from the 5 countries, which ECHA took the decision to exclude certain sectors such as technical textiles, machinery, sealing applications, some medical applications. This was a bit of shock, but I had just come into the chemicals beat in August, and I saw that ECHA had admitted that we don't have the time and the resources to tackle these other crucial sectors where PFAS is found. And Charles, I want to ask for a bit more clarity on what will happen to these sectors. I mean, ECHA has given us some clarity on how to what the Commission might be able to do, but what comes next for these certain sectors?
Well, I guess that's formally that's up to the Commission. So so that's the formal answer. And I understand what ECHA did. I mean, they in the first proposal we published in January 23, we had these 15 sectors, so that is said, well, okay, we start with these. I think that made sense from their perspective, a practical approach it was. But now you have the question, what do you do with the remaining 8, which are in the final background document? I think, well, it's not up to me, but for example, the Socio-Economic Assessment Committee, they also had a practical proposal how to deal with it. So to, for example, you could do a temporary derogation for these sectors and then use the time to assess those. Another way to deal with it was that the Commission, because all these sectors are in the background document, the Commission could also decide to decide based on that. But I mean, it's up to the Commission. There are ways to work around it because, well, we did include the information we have on these sectors in the background document.
And when it comes to leaving this to the Commission, we know that and this competitiveness climate, there could be a chance. I mean, I want to ask Jutta especially, because I know that she might have a very vocal response on this. Do you think that PFAS will become yet another cutting red tape exercise, making life easy for the industry, as they would say, and simplifying? But how do we go so far that it doesn't put risk of protection of human health and the environment?
Well, actually, I do hope that it's not regarded as red tape when you want to protect human health and the environment from substances which will still be there when we and our children or our great-grandchildren are no longer, right? So we really have to think ahead when it comes to using those substances. I believe it would be prudent to have a close look at the respective application. For example, when you say we need something that is very durable against heat, against acid, against leach, against pressure, whatever, then any alternative would probably be as problematic as PFAS. But this is not true for pizza cartons. This is not true for frying pans. This is not true for your outdoor clothes. So we have a lot of examples where alternatives are available already or will be available in a few years' time. And so I'm perfectly fine with saying, okay, let's give this 12-year derogation to medical products, to defense sector, whatever. And do say we'll have a closer look again after, let's say, 6 years. Looking, is there anything in the pipeline? But when it comes to the competitiveness agenda, also part of this agenda is innovation. And by giving leeway forever for legacy chemicals, you kill innovation. Because no one will invest in innovation if they know we'll have to fight against someone who's already there on the market with all the value chain, with all the processes, blah, blah, blah. So you only have a chance to innovate if you keep, so to speak, the end of the story open. And if after 6 years you see, okay, still nothing there yet, give another 6 years, no problem.
And do you think that in the way that we've seen the industry push back on, for example, revising the EU's flagship chemicals law, REACH, This was something that the German chemicals industry asked for, and then CEFIC, the chemicals lobby in Brussels, also asked for. Do you think it will go down the same road with PFAS?
Well, REACH is not a bad legislation, right? So, and actually the political climate we're in, at least in the parliament, which I know best, of course, of the three entities, I'm not sure whether we could have even passed the current REACH in this parliament. So basically opening REACH would have been a big risk to the provisions which are in there when it comes to transparency, when it comes to data provisions and all that. So of course, from a scientific point of view, I would have quite a list of things which could be changed in REACH, but the political climate we're in does not make it very probable that this would actually happen. So at the end of the day, I think the scientist in me says, oh, how could they? But the politician in me says, okay, maybe it's better.
Elisa, I want touching on what Jutta has just said, I want to know if you agree at all in regards to, because you handle REACH at your organization. I'm wondering, could it have helped to have a REACH revision before this PFAS restriction came into play? Because it's been delayed for 6 years and now out the door.
You know, I don't think so. I think that these are two very complex topics. I don't think that one would have necessarily helped the other. I think that when we look at reopening REACH, it's massive. So you call it indeed the cornerstone of chemical legislation. It has been copied across several countries in the world. It has created a standard. And it needs some adjustments, I think, mostly just to bring it to today's world as well. But as Jutta mentioned, reopening it's a massive work. And I think that if we would have waited for that, we would have delayed PFAS even more. And as Jutta mentioned, there are some uses of PFAS that don't need to be delayed. I think that the REACH restriction process exists. It is not something that needs to be completely rewritten. What was submitted under the PFAS file was ambitious, even for the REACH restriction process, but I think that these were too big to be done also in parallel. I think it was a good choice to take the time to do a proper assessment of the current situation.
And what would you like to see from the Commission? Because you also mentioned innovation.
Yeah.
What would you like to see from the Commission in terms of supporting the industry and defining alternatives from PFAS? I mean, you have the Chemicals Industry Action Plan, but could you touch a little bit on what is it that you want from the Commission?
So many things, but still, I could come up with a list, but it's okay. Roswell has left no Christmas list for me. But it's, as I said, we don't develop chemistry. We only can start our testing once there is something to test. I think what we were enjoying when there was the discussion about the REACH revision was about the supply chain. We are completely reliant on our supply chain when it comes to the information, for example. Having the digitalized SDS is something that we were completely on board with. So for us as well, everything that is reporting, if we do get it from our supply chain, and if there is any mandatory reporting that goes throughout the supply chain, that is something that does help us. What we do have as an issue, and I think that this also links to the exemption question that you did before, I am asked very often, oh, just get an exemption for defense. That doesn't work, because getting an exemption from regulatory requirement doesn't mean that there is a market for those substances. So if we can use the substances, but we cannot find them on the market, then this means that we will be reliant on third countries. And that makes us vulnerable. So for us, it's also that there is the request maybe to really take a look the whole picture and what could be the impacts on the availability of some substances before launching some of the initiatives.
Charles, I want to go back to you for a bit, because previously Elisa also laid out why these sectors don't need PFAS. But I wanted to ask from a regulatory point of view, and how you distinguish between the uses that are essential and the ones that are where the industry had not invested in alternatives yet. I mean, where do you draw the line from a scientific point of view? I mean, we had examples that we discussed, such as ski wax that ECHA is looking into, and also kitchen equipment like baking sheets. From a purely scientific point of view, I want to ask where your red line is.
Well, we didn't enter into the discussion about essential or not. So what we looked at from the proposal was one side is, and that's why it's so broad, is where is the risk for humans and for nature? And then you don't want regrettable substitution, so you need a broad proposal, broad restriction. That's one step, and the next is look at where there are alternatives and where there aren't. So we more or less, because you don't want to overcomplicate it, we made three brackets. One is where there are already alternatives available, so you get a period to adjust in the proposal of 18 months. The second is where there are alternatives, but they are not readily available. So they're not mass produced on a scale which you can buy right away. So these have a 5-year period plus this 18 months extra period. And then there's a category where we, up till now, based on the information provided by all sectors, where we see there are no alternatives yet. And these have the longest period of 12 years, plus the adjustment period.
As the commission recently came out with this with a study, basically putting on the different scenarios on how, if the EU tackles PFAS, if we're too late, if we tackle it head on. I mean, there were scenarios where it would cost €500 million, and there were some scenarios where treatment and cleanup from water would cost up to 1.7 trillion. I know that the Netherlands recently came out with its own estimation how much it would cost to clean up PFAS, which is I think was 6 billion per year. I mean, are you preparing for the worst case scenario in this regard? I mean, are you looking into different opportunities and options on how to approach tackling PFAS pollution?
I think these are two different questions. One is how do we handle which PFASs are in the future coming into are emitted or are when you have to circulate waste, how you handle that. And the ones which are already prevalent in nature and in humans. So the cost about removal is about the last, the restriction is about the first question, which are for me are two different questions. And in the end, I mean, deciding on how much is it worth for you to gain extra better health and better nature, that's a political question, which I can't answer from a scientific point of view for politicians. I can show the trade-off, but it's not up to me to decide.
Maybe I'll ask the politician the most political question. This is where politics becomes difficult in PFAS. I mean, everyone agrees that PFAS pollution is a major problem. And a lot of this debate is also about who gets hurt in Brussels. Industry is often invited to the room to explain the cost of regulation. I mean, recently you had the Director General of CEFIC, Marco Mensink, speaking with ministers at the Competitiveness Council last week, while on the other side, you know, the victims of PFAS pollution across Europe came to the Berlaymont recently in the last few weeks and have asked repeatedly for a meeting with the Commissioner von der Leyen. I mean, what is your impression on this, Jutta? Do you think it's a fair trade that the victims aren't heard?
I mean, we will actually have people in the European Parliament tomorrow, which we invited, and they will have their blood tested on PFAS. People who are partly really exposed to PFAS, such as a wine grower. A lot of the PFAS that are present in our bodies probably stem from pesticides, because pesticides are not part of the restrictions because they don't fall under REACH, so it's purely a formal issue, but that would be, in my opinion, one angle which maybe should be looked at more with more scrutiny, let's put it that way. What I found a bit disconcerting in all the Commission proposals which came out in this omnibus rally, there was always an estimation of costs saved for bureaucracy or for submittance of data, whatever. And never ever was there an estimation of the benefits. I mean, the base of your restriction proposal was also the study from the Nordic Council of Ministers, which said we already today have health costs of 70 to 80 billion euro a year across Europe from PFAS exposure. And this would, if it were an omnibus, this wouldn't have found entrance into the estimation how much cost does industry save, because the other side is simply not part of the balance sheet. And I think that's a fundamental mistake which we have done for far too long when you look at, for example, climate CO2 cost, where it was long, far too long. The debate was, well, we alone cannot do anything, look at the cost for our industry, and only after some scientists started calculating what is the cost of CO2 being emitted, then there was some sort of clarity in the debate. And that's something that is still missing, I believe, in the chemical sector, because for a lot of people which are not much acquainted with it, they say, well, there's pollution everywhere anyhow, and it already has become much better, look at air quality, which is of course true. But why does it have become better? Because we had regulation. And saying, okay, let's be competitive, let's cut down our air quality directive. I'm not sure whether our citizens would be really enchanted to hear that. And also, again, innovation. You only fuel innovation if you regulate. That has been proven over and over and over again. And last point to the numbers, I have made the experience several times, citing the study of the Nordic Council of Ministers, that people would simply not believe me. They said, oh, these are invented numbers, and no one can really tell this person got sick because of PFAS. And it's a bit like the air quality discussion we had 10 years ago over and over again. And
this is the ultimate test, right, that the Commission has, because what happens when we deal with the next harmful chemicals pollution problem of our time? And this is the ultimate test. But I wanted to ask, because we have a few minutes left, and I want to ask each and every one of you what you expect to see, because, for example, there's a lot of parts in the proposal where PFAS has been delegated to other regulations. I mean, we've seen that in pesticides, knowing full well that there is PFAS, in many cases of PFAS in pesticides, but that has been assigned to deal with in its own regulation. And we've seen the same recommendation on F-gases. I mean, do you think that this is, I'll leave this to whoever wants to answer, do you think this is the right approach? Or do we tackle PFAS head on this restriction and not rather delegate it to other areas? I mean, we see it in different omnibus. The Defense Readiness Omnibus as well is also tackling PFAS. Maybe, because I mentioned defense, maybe you might have an answer on that.
Okay, I can try. I think that we can only ask to REACH to do what REACH can do. So at some point, some of these aspects are indeed outside the realm of REACH. Will need to be tackled elsewhere. So as PFAS is a multifaceted, complex issue, it will need a complex solution that probably does not reside only within REACH. At least that's what I expect. And one thing I also want to touch upon is that Commissioner Roswell has spoken many times in her speeches about tackling PFAS from consumer use. But recently I've seen the wording change and to consumer use and where substitutions are available. But I'm wondering, we only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask, what is it that you want to see from the PFAS restriction? Because essentially, the problem is not in consumer use. It's in the PFAS manufacturing. It's when you take the PFAS out of the equation. I mean, it has such an enormous consequence on these processes, especially when it comes to fluoropolymers. But maybe you want to follow up on what you recently just said. Do you think there needs to be emphasis from the industry to allow Brussels to understand and for the EU to understand and citizens to understand how their everyday product that they use and that they rely on so heavily, if you take PFAS out of the equation, then you won't find the same results? It can be. I mean, as a consumer, as a European and as a consumer, I do have some expectations from the EU in terms of protection. So, of course, where it can be substituted, where exposure can be minimized, it's important. But I think that indeed many don't also realize there are many products that we use that need PFAS every day. In the medical, it can be in the technology, and life would be very different if these products were not as safe to use. It's not necessarily about the performance in many things. In some cases, it's about them being safe to use. And I think that we also need to put, to shine the light, as you said, the manufacturer is an issue and the disposal is an issue. I think that those are if we want to tackle this in an efficient way, we need to prioritize, I think, the way we work, and we need to find an efficient way to point in the right direction.
We only have 3 minutes left, so I want to ask each and every one of you, starting with Charles, what do you want to see from the PFAS restriction, the final one?
Well, what do I want to see? Well, I would say, I hope that the Commission takes it forward, but the next step is a political discussion. So from a regulatory perspective, it's from now on, it's out of my hands. So I hope that they make a wise decision on the way forward, provide a path towards reducing PFAS in big steps, and how they balance it, that's the political side of it. And at the same time provide a path for industry, how they know how to look for alternatives, so that's clear the way they should work forward to make Europe healthier and prettier again on this part.
Well said. I know I don't want to push you too much on the political question, so again, I'll leave that to Jutta.
Yes, of course. I do hope that the Commission looks very closely at the RUC opinion, because this is very, very crystal clear on the risks and the hazards which these substances pose. And I would like to see, of course, where possible, as fast phase out as possible, where we need some time to, as you said, develop the market ability, so to speak. Give that time, but not too long. Don't give eternity exemptions. Always have a revision date, of course, but don't give eternity derogations. And for the derogations, very strong guardrails on production, on decommissioning of whatever feature the PFAS are in, because we also want to enter circular economy. I visited a water supplier some weeks back. They have invested literally millions because there was compost which was contaminated with used paper, which was contaminated with PFAS, which is now in their drinking water. Great. And huge cost for the water supplier and for the citizens. This is not the way we want to go.
I'll leave the last for you.
Yes. Well, from my side, I think that it's good that now it's for the Commission to also take into account the political aspect. We have participated into the RAC and SEAC discussions for a few years now, so it has been very enlightening, and I think also the opinions show that it was a complex discussion. It was but at this moment we also need to think strategically. So it's going to be for the Commission to find a good balance between the protection of the human health and the environment, but also they need to look at their own strategic objectives as well.
I mean, it's pretty obvious that we all have the same goal. It's just a matter of how we get there and how fast we get there on phasing out PFAS. Thank you all so much for this fascinating discussion, and I'm excited to see what comes out at the end of the year and how fast the Commission will act. But after a quick stage change, my colleague Zia Weiss, Politico's senior climate reporter, will sit down with the European Climate Commissioner Wolfgang Hoekstra. Don't miss it. Thank you all.